Welcome to the Spinwhiz Comic Show.
Whoa.
From Raleigh, North Carolina. Join us for exclusive interviews with the publishers bringing you the newest titles in indie comics, webcomics, movies, and more.
No way.
And now, here's your host, Jeff Palumbo.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Spinwhiz Comic Show. I am always your host, Jeff Palumbo. Thank you for coming in. Thanks for being part of it. We have a late interview tonight. For those of you that are on Twitch live, thanks for coming in late. It is a little bit later than normal, but Mike and I, we wanted to make sure this worked, and we both have kids. So for those of you that do have kids, you completely understand what happened. For those of you that don't, well, you'll get there someday. With us tonight is Mike Montalvo, who does all sorts of cool stuff. I'm not going to get into it too much because that's what the interview is for. I want him to tell us about himself. If I do it, all I have to do is just talk. And that's not any fun. You guys don't care about that. So we're going to bring this man in. He has been doing comics for quite some time, all sorts of lettering, all sorts of coloring, multiple things with Crazy Monkey Ink, but he goes beyond that. But again, I don't want to talk about it. I want him to talk about himself. So let's get him in here. Mike, are you there? There he is, Mike. Good, man. Thank you for coming in. Much appreciated. And thank you again. This was a last minute for those of you that don't know. Mike and I were kind of talking earlier today. Somebody dropped for today's interview, and I was like, hey, does anybody want to come on? And Mike's like, yeah, I'm in. And I'm like, well, that's fantastic. So he bailed me out completely, but little did I know that I was bringing in an absolute professional. Like sometimes you're like, hey, who wants to jump in? And you're taking the person who might have, creating their first comic or whatever. But it just so happens that Mike jumps in and he's way more professional than I have, or has a more professional background than even I have, and some of the people we've already had on the show. So Mike, thanks so much for taking time out of your night to come hang out with us, hang out at the Spinwhiz Comic Show, and I really appreciate it. Yeah, man, anytime. So just so everybody knows, we are doing it live on Twitch. If you are on the podcast, don't worry about all the links. They'll be in the transcription. If you're watching on YouTube, just look below. There's links there. There will be links to go to all of Mike's stuff. Don't worry about it. Enjoy, just watch the show. If you are live, obviously, we are interactive, so ask all the questions you want. But I'm going to start out the first question. So, Mike, you are the first letterer we've ever had on the show. And I think when people think of lettering, they're like, oh, it's easy and all this stuff. But I think what people forget is that without letterers, it's just a bunch of pages with art. So how the heck did you get into lettering? Because it is a much needed skill. You can tell a crappy letterer in some of the comics that are out there, because it's not just text. It's all sorts of stuff to make, the boom and the bang and all the other things, as well as fonts and things of that nature. Can you go in how you kind of got into this and how you started making a living off of it?
So 7 years ago, I went ahead and I started looking up how to letter comics. And I went online. I found a couple of tutorials. Now, everything was on different media. Like I like to use Photoshop. Everything had other ways for lettering, and I'm like, no, I want to use Photoshop. I use Photoshop for everything. I want to use Photoshop. So I started looking at several different websites, including Blombart, where you can learn to letter. Mm-hmm. And little by little, in a matter of, I don't know, I researched. It took me about a week. And then I started lettering the comic. Of course, it wasn't perfect. Lettering isn't as easy as it looks. There's a bit of an art to it because you need to make sure you don't cover the artwork. It needs to be at a certain font, and the bubbles need to be at a certain shape. And the way you place the bubbles is the way that also carries how you read the comic. So the mood into it, right? So if you have everything in one big bubble, you tend to read it continuously. But if the bubble kind of splits and there's two connecting bubbles, that you kind of form a bit of a pause and leads you into the next bubble. So going through there, learning that, I don't know, one thing led to another. We really needed to do this. And my first lettering job was that it was just needed to fulfill a spot that somebody was busy and couldn't fulfill on that comic, and we needed the project to meet the deadline. And I don't know, I ended up liking it. There was little tips and tricks and techniques that I brought in from other sources. I think it's Adobe Illustrator and a couple of things like that. And those things don't necessarily work on Photoshop, but I came up with my own ways of doing it. And next thing you know, I got my own way of reproducing exactly what's being reproduced somewhere else.
That's crazy. So let me get this straight. You are a superhero because you were taught yourself lettering in a week. Can I boil it to that?
Pretty much.
That's amazing. That is, and that's not easy. There is a science behind lettering, like you said, in order for not blocking the art, trying to fit the words almost like, because for those of you that don't know, a script for comic books is very much like a movie script. And it has certain frames. The artist is given what the writer might want in frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, etc. And then the chat bubbles go along with that. But sometimes an artist will fill up a full frame where you don't have much room to work with, but you have quite a bit of dialogue. So you have to get really creative on how you do that. So how does that not stress you out? Because it would freak me out to no end, because I'm a planner. I'd be like, I can't do it. Forget it. We're done. You're not getting any letters.
Well, for lettering, every time I get a commission, it depends, right? So you get the newer people who are doing their first comic or maybe on their second comic, and they're not that knowledgeable, and they're really eager to get their artwork out there. They don't seem to take in consideration that there are words that are going to be on that panel. And so they fill the panel up with all this passion and work. And then it gets to me, and I look at it, and I was like, oh my God, how am I going to fit this in there and show that beautiful work, or what's important in there? What's important in that artwork? Like, the background doesn't matter, and this doesn't matter. Oh, but the gesture that guy's doing is matter because it's what's mentioned somewhat inside that script. So that's one thing. And the other thing too is not just the artist. It's also the people who are learning how to write for the first time, that they become very wordy, and they have these panels. Okay, panel 1, and then it's just like blah 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 going on forever. It's like, wait, did you realize that doesn't fit? Mm-hmm. So sometimes what I do when I encounter these situations is of course it slows me down, because then I got to figure out how I'm going to break this up and how I'm going to fit it into the panel, or then I'll start making suggestions. These panels seem to be about more or less the same topic. Can we spread the bubbles out and maybe use these panels over here? Or do you want to cut your wording, like your script, down a little bit and reword it that it means the same thing, but it's shorter? So it does take time when you get new people in, and it is frustrating. I mean, when somebody gives me something and it's written properly and the artwork's been done properly, I can letter about 4 to 5 pages in an hour.
Wow.
But as soon as I get one page that's wordy, it gets me stuck, because it gets important. It's like I read the page, I read the script. What matches on that script is the artwork, and what leads the story. So when you need to block stuff in the panel, you need to start thinking, what are the gestures or what portions of that panel are actually describing what's happening on this script? What can you block that won't ruin the flow of the comic? Mm-hmm. And that takes time. And of course, you got to come up with ideas, and you need a template to put on top of the page. I usually use, I started with Kablams has a template, and I started with that template. And the template is not necessarily for lettering, but it's made that it gives you the margins on where you can put things. And of course, then I use that, if it's too wordy, to move the bubbles out as far as I can on the margins. You don't want it to get cropped out. You don't want it to be away from the white margin. It needs to be inside these margins, and you also don't want the bubbles to touch lines, and it also doesn't look right. So there's a lot of consideration when you're lettering, for sure.
Yeah.
And of course, the font. The font also is an indication of whatever is talking. If you have an evil character and you want to at least convey that he's speaking in an evil voice, then you need to change your font. You may need to change the color of the bubble. It may need to be black with white letters, and so forth. And the shape of the bubble also have to change depending on what they're saying. But it took me a little while longer to learn other things. Didn't take me a ton, but as I was going, I kept researching and looking at other comics from DC and looking at Marvel and looking at Image, and you'll realize that a couple of things are exactly a standard and others are not. For example, yelling on a comic is not a standard. You'll have some of the big three that'll put a red around the bubble, indicating there's a scream. But then you have the other ones that'll do like a burst bubble where the bubble is there, but the words start coming out of the bubble and bursting it out. So you have different styles. So I tend to combine the styles depending on the strength of the scream, I guess. So yeah, I make my own. But some things I keep the same, like the budding of the bubbles, the way the bubbles are placed. You have the tails. The tails need to point exactly at the center of the mouth, and they need to look like they're coming from the center of the bubble, and so forth. There's a lot of things that I've seen that are, how can I say, well, a standard. They need to be there to make it look right, to make it flow.
Well, and it makes me think that you're obviously a genius, because you have to be able to read a scene. You know the words that have to be there, but you have to be able to imagine that scene being spoken. Instead of, just like an artist has to imagine what the scene looks like with the wording and what they're trying to get across from an emotional perspective, you have to be able to look at the words and say, how does it match what we're trying to portray in that scene, which is super hard. And then you get into like sounds, like the rock or the pow or whatever. And so then
sound effects, yes.
And then you start getting into, you're obviously also a colorist, so you might have an edge on a lot of other letterers because that's your thing. Like you can probably meld both better than a lot of people. But how do you then start stretching out all these cool, like, do you ever draw the lettering in, or does an artist do that? If there's something that is a sound that is very dramatic to that scene, how does that go about?
I tend to use a different font.
Oh, okay.
There are fonts out there that are made for comic book people, and there are a lot of free fonts. I use one called 12 ton. I think it's called 12 ton, and this is a normal font used for things like sound effects and whatnot, because the font isn't straight, so it's kind of wacky. Before, I used to do my own wacky fonts, and it took me a while because I had to put one letter at a time in the screen, and then I purposely had to twist and turn each letter and enlarge each letter separately and put them together in a way that didn't look like they were separate.
Yeah, which gets tedious.
So it gets tedious, but there are other things to go with it. It's not just a matter of the lettering, but when it comes down to what you're using, like the media, like Photoshop, you need to learn how to work with the layers and the groups of layers. It becomes extremely important, because learning how to manage those layers, the groups, also managing things like the layer mask, to be able to create what you want and group it so you can move it around, because that's the other thing. You may think you put in a word or you put in a sound effect, but you look at the panel. How's the character coming? Would it look okay at the top of the character? Would it look okay at the bottom? Would it look okay further back because the character's moving really fast? Should the effect be that the words are being left behind? So taking that into consideration, once you put the words in, you want to move them around. And if you do something like I did, where you end up putting a whole bunch of letters to make a word, you don't want to move each individual word and a letter and start trying to accommodate it. So you need to learn how to make groups and how to, manage those layers and how do the blending of those layers work together. So that way you grab it, you move it. And there are, for example, talking into that, when you have bubbles, you have the joint bubbles where you have one bubble above and you have one below, but it's jointed into this one.
Yep.
And the outline goes around the two bubbles. It doesn't have a line in between the bubbles.
Yep.
When you do that, it's also good to know how you do it with the groups and the layers. So that way, if the bottom bubble needs to move a little bit, the outline shifts and changes and it actually fits, and you don't have to outline it all over again.
Yeah, good idea.
So there's a lot of tips and tricks that you can do inside Photoshop to help you with all this lettering.
And do you teach this as well? Like, do you have YouTube videos or whatever teaching people the tricks of the trade?
No, I've thought about it. I've actually thought about starting maybe with teaching people the basics on learning about the layers and the groups and learning about the layer masks, the importance of getting these together properly, because there's a huge difference on how you would want to do it. It how can I put it? It puts a different effect. And when you do, you need to use what's called the nested groups in order to get it right. For, let's say, a quick example would be you have a bubble. The bubble has a black outline. Now you want to cut the bubble because you want to put the character's head above that bubble for some reason. Let's put it that way. If you use a group and then on that group you use a layer mask and cut that, well, the outline will actually follow that cut in black. You don't want that because now there's more dark on top of that character. So you have to nest the group. So you put that group inside another group of layers. And on the top layer, you add the layer mask. And then when it cuts, it acts like everything is one, and it actually cuts that. And there's no black line or anything that follows. It's just a nice cut. And then you do it, you do it at the line of the character, and it seems that the character's head is right in front of the bubble. And as you know, bubbles are done at the end. The lettering is done at the end. So all those effects like that, you need to take a lot of consideration on how you use your tool.
Well, Mike, I can automatically say right now I will never be a letterer. I don't have that kind of patience. But let's also get into the fact that you're also a colorist. So, and you started with coloring, correct? When did that whole thing start?
In reality, I wanted to be more of an artist before, and I used draw on and off. It was the thing. And for a very long time, I think I'll say it was almost 20 years, I didn't pick up a pencil and draw. So when I did, it was like a kid starting all over again. That whole thing, like it's riding on a bike, that didn't work for me. It looked horrible. And, it's one of those things. You have to have patience and time, and I was working and I didn't have the time, and I was like, you know what, put it aside. And one day a friend of mine who draws these great comic book creatures, Luis Hernandez, he uploaded a black and white creature. I'm like, well, that would look fine with color. So I took it down and I opened Photoshop, and because I did a lot of photograph editing, so I had Photoshop. So I took it down and I went online and did the same thing I did for the lettering after. Went on YouTube, started looking for some videos on coloring, and
that's amazing.
looked at some stuff and I'm like, hey, that's kind of cool. Okay. And then I looked at different styles. Oh, this guy uses his gradient tool. Oh, this guy uses a brush. This guy, this. And then I just started slowly combining techniques. So then I colored his character and I put it online and I thought, okay, well, this is not so bad. And from there, someone saw it and said, hey, that's kind of neat. Would you like to color a small comic that I have? Say an 8-pager comic. And it wasn't anything huge because this guy is from his style was more golden age.
Mm-hmm.
So the colors didn't need shading and highlights. It was just pretty much they were just flats.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, sure, no problem. So I started with that. I flatted his work and he put that online. And then I don't know if you know who Seek Donnelly is. They're from he had a Kickstarter raising funds for the Brain Aneurysm Foundation.
Okay.
And he had a huge project. It was a graphic novel, and he was just looking for artists anywhere, all over the world, to draw and color and letter a page for free. But it's all for the generating funds for.
Yep.
And I thought, okay, this is a good idea. I'll come in here, and I said I'll take a page. Next thing you know, a couple of people were dropping because they had other things that they needed to do or didn't have the time. And he'd come by. It's like, hey, do you want to color another page? Sure, no problem. Well, you want to do another page? Sure, no problem. Next thing I knew, I did about 6 pages on that project. It was 63 pages long. Very beautiful project. It was a very beautiful story. Basically, Seek Donnelly, he suffered from brain aneurysms.
Mm-hmm.
And his character was basically a hero who had a brain aneurysm and had one day to live.
Jesus.
And he wanted to, instead of fighting all his enemies and putting them to jail or finish them off, he wanted to try to convert them to help save the world when he was gone, because he had one day left. So it's a very interesting story. So I thought it was great. So again, at the end, I colored 6 pages, but I met a lot of indie comic book artists there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I met Mohamed Lubis, aka Louis-san, who's my partner on Lumi Art Studios. A year after that, we opened Lumi Art Studios together.
Wow. And I have that link. I'm going to drop it into chat right now so you guys can check it out. And like I said, on Facebook, or I'm sorry, on YouTube, don't worry about it. And transcript, it'll be in there, so there's no worries. But that's crazy. And how many years ago was that happened?
Well, I've been coloring and lettering pretty much for 7 years, so 6 years has been open. He does pencils and inks, and I do colors and letters, and together we bring the graphic, all the script to life. Right now, it's been a little crazy. I've been doing a lot of coloring and lettering commissions from other people who have already brought their own artwork. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. We don't pick and choose. Whatever comes.
Yeah, money's money, man.
Yeah, sometimes he gets his own commissions on his side, and I get my own, and that's how it works. And then sometimes you get somebody who says, I want it all.
Yeah, those are nice.
Yeah, so it's great. It's a good collaboration we have together. And then Gabriel came along one day too, and all he asked me for was lettering. Funny enough, he had a post. They were looking for a letterer, and I didn't have anything to do, and I said sure, and I put a couple of my sample pages, and Crazy Monkey Inc. was like, sure, you got the commission. I did a couple. I think I started with Darren, Captain of the Stars, which you actually have on Spinwhiz.
Yep.
Yeah, and I did some of his other comics as well, Midnight's Avenger, there's so many comics that they have that I've been working on. Mostly at the beginning it was lettering because he didn't know I could color. So he was just using me as a letterer. And next thing you know, I ended up coloring some other things too that were Crazy Monkey Ink, and now he's also asking me to color for them too.
That's awesome.
So I believe you have from them Vorpal 1 and 2.
Yep, Vorpal 1 and 2 are in the mix.
Yeah, I didn't touch those, but Vorpal 3 is just finished, about to be published. I colored that comic. And Jason Tudor, he's doing his own lettering. He's the creator writer. And then we also have Taxi Cab Joe 1 and 2 are currently out. They're published by Crazy Monkey Inc. Their creator is Corey Ruhepler. I both colored and lettered those comics. We also have Candace Lark is Furious from Brian J.L. Glass. There was a Kickstarter for that, I believe, last year. The project is a little late, but we're working to get it up to date. Right now, I'm currently working on both coloring and lettering that project. I'm right now around page 14.
Mm-hmm.
So we're hoping to get that done by the end of the year. Because we're
Awesome.
still waiting some pages from the artist. But
So
yeah,
you hustle, man.
Oh yeah, and the only thing is I only work in the evenings for a couple hours.
So you work during the day as well. You're like the normal of us that has a full-time job, and then we all do this at night.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
By day, I'm an IT guy, and by night, I am the colorist letter Avenger.
That's awesome. That's great. Yeah, going back to that, and I've known Gabe for quite a time now, and he's fantastic. And so for everybody listening, Gabe is actually the CEO owner of Crazy Monkey Inc., who is one of our partners. And I'm meeting all you guys now through him, which is just fantastic. And the art is great. The coloring, the lettering is just great. I mean, it's a top-tier publisher that you may not have heard of yet just because there's so many great publishers out right now. But as we kind of keep going with you, and as I talk to more and more people, I would say 99% of us do work during the day and then do this at night because we just enjoy it. I mean, yes, it makes a little bit of money here and there too, but the amount of money it makes compared to the joy that we get out of doing it is minimal. Granted, we'd all like to make more money off what we do and do this full time, but that doesn't always happen. So, what can you say about, if you were given the opportunity, would you transition? And let me pause on that real quick because it looks like your video stopped.
Oh, no.
For whatever reason. I don't know if that's my camera or not. Let me see. Hold up 1 second. We're going to pause right here. I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to edit this whole part out. Wait 1 second. Let me see if I can get you back here.
Is it me?
I think it's on you. Whoop, I took a snapshot. Whoop. Oh, dear.
I can see you said you took a snapshot.
Yeah, that was
and do you have me back now?
There we go. All right, getting back into it.
Perfect.
So a lot of us have that secondary job. Would you, if given the opportunity, color and letter full time, or do you enjoy it to the point where you're like, you know what, that might actually ruin it for me and I wouldn't want to do it anymore?
No, I don't think I'd do it full time. I mean, it would depend. Let me put it this way. If I had a different job in the morning where it was like probably a bit over minimum wage and whatnot, then maybe it would entice me to say, yeah, I would love to do this full time. I do have a passion for it. I love coloring. I love the lettering. I love the comic book work. I love the art. I buy comics for art as well sometimes. And the story is important, but what catches my eye. But I have a nice job, and I work with the government, and I have a pension. I don't think I want to leave that behind.
No, don't do that.
So that would be definitely a mistake on that portion. But if I didn't have a job with a pension, Maybe, maybe. I mean, it's nice, it's fun. Again, you have your frustrating moments, and it's nothing that it's a horrible thing. It's just sometimes just dealing with new people that are upcoming, fresh, and they don't take their time to probably research and figure out how to do something. They know how to draw, so they immediately get into it, or they can write or think they can write, and then they pour their heart and soul into it. But their writing is more for a book than for a script. And again, it's not wrong. It's just learning and getting your pace and getting them properly. And people, a lot of people are nice, right? They're willing to make changes. They understand. They know they haven't done it before, so they'll talk to you. And some people get intimidated. They're like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I've never really dealt with somebody who knows what they're talking about on the comic." Or, well, look, I'm not an extreme. I've been doing this for a while, but it's not like I'm the it's out there. There's just people who've been doing it longer than me, but it's just little tidbits of information. We all learn as we go, and that's just it. So my biggest as we're on this, I'll just put it this way: my biggest pet peeve is consistency. If you don't have consistency, it's a problem for me. It kind of, the artwork, that's number one. Sometimes the background doesn't matter. Background is not as important, right? You don't want to bring attention to the background. Everything's in the foreground. But if you have these characters, they're on and they have like 5 screens and a whole bunch of buttons, the buttons don't matter. But if you're going to have like 1 screen and then 5 screens and then 3 screens and then font and screen, and that kind of seems kind of awkward when you're coloring, especially when you start bringing pipes into the background. There's a pipe here behind this TV, but it wasn't there, and then it's there, and then this character's wearing a necklace, but now she's not wearing it on the next panel. So it's like, okay, what do I do here? How do I fit this? It may not seem that important to some other people, but if you think about it, it's like, well, this is not that consistent. It's like, well, what's going on? And the same thing happens with the storyline. Some people get very focused on what they're writing, and they want to get to the next thing, and wait, this panel kind of didn't really flow into that one. But what are you trying to say here? I don't get it. So consistency, for sure, it's one of my pet peeves.
Yep.
And the next one for the is wordy comics. Too wordy. That's a big problem. I hate seeing so many bubbles all over the place that the whole artwork is ruined. As you think about it, poor guy, you gave the artist this thing. He went through, he poured his heart out, creating all these panels, every page for you, making sure the character looked very similar and the whole deal. And then now I come along and I cover half of his work.
Yeah, and what good is that? But that's what you have to do.
And I start thinking, because I'm a colorist, I start thinking about it. It's like, geez, how would that guy feel that I just covered the faces of these other characters because this main character was saying something and didn't fit?
Yeah. But I mean, when I first started, 6 years ago, I was actually writing a novel, and then I had always wanted to write a comic book. So I had luckily, I had hired Glasshouse Graphics and David Campiti to actually help me out. And I'm telling you, he was fantastic. He helped me through the first script. Bong Dazo was my inker and my colorist, or I'm sorry, my inker and my penciler. So he kind of helped me through. He read the script. He's like, Jeff, I love the idea. Get an editor. First thing. So I asked David, I'm like, hey, I need an editor. And he got me one, and they're like, listen, we get what you're trying to do, but what you need to understand is that you don't need as many words anymore, because that's what the artist is for. And you don't need to show all the emotion, because that's what the art and the letterer is for. It shows if there's a kaboom and a bang and, something has to be dramatic. You put those notes in there, and the colorist, the letterer, and the artist will all take care of that for you, so you don't need to write it in. And I think I went from, I must have had like 28 I apologize. We ended up going from 28 pages down to 22, but that was after I had actually brought 12 written pages down to actual comic book layout. And it was awful trying to do that. But now that I know how to do that, that's how I write. When I'm going to write, when I write issue 2, issue 3, issue 4 of Chimera, even when I outline, I actually write in that format, so it's much quicker. It's just pop, 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 pop. And now they have like cool software like Subscript that, you know, one of the guys launched, and I use that. So, or Superscript, excuse me. So that's much easier. But yeah, I'm with you that I go back to the KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid. Like
that's correct.
Like
that's
keep
correct.
it short, keep it easy. Let the words do the only thing that art cannot bring across.
I have a suggestion.
Please do. That's what we're here for.
Look, when we write, because I won't lie, I dabble into writing as well.
That does not surprise me.
I got something I'll mention in a little bit. But when we write or we read, most of us that go into comics, stuff like that, we tend to see it as a movie playing in our head, right? And that's when your muse goes and you see it flowing and you see it in your head and you're writing. What I would also suggest is, it may seem stupid, but do you remember the music videos with the pop-up bubbles?
Yeah, pop-up video.
Exactly. So you need to try to envision what they're saying with a bubble. If you do that, it's not as easy, but you get the hang of it. It's almost like watching a caption, but except it's in bubbles. If you do that, you take into consideration that what you're writing may or may not fit in that panel that you're looking at in your head.
Really good tip, like super pro tip.
Because that has to be taken into consideration. Because sometimes we have the idea and we see in our heads, okay, this is panel 1, this is panel 2, this is panel 3, panel 4. But we're looking at it more or less what we want to say to the artist. But we should also keep in our mind what you just wrote. Does it fit? So just look at it while it's playing in your head. Try to imagine the bubbles coming out.
I love it.
And where do you want them? And next thing you know, it might not be perfect, but you'll shave yourself down. And when you give that script to the letterer, he'll be like, damn, this is good, and won't bother you.
And rip right through it.
As a letterer, I will bug you every time that I can't fit the stuff. I will bug you. But,
by the way,
yes.
Jeff, I'm calling you for the 37th time today because your words are too damn long.
Yes, this is too wordy, buddy. Cut it down. It's like, get a thesaurus.
Yeah, exactly.
Those 3 words down to 1. Yes, but so as you're aware, we were talking earlier, I'm with Lumi Art Studios, so I'm co-founder.
Yep.
We created a comic together. So we have Inner Beings, and we have a number 1. It's been out for a long time. So basically, that comic's been out now for about 6 years.
Oh, wow.
So it's got like the stuff how we worked before. We are working on number 2, but we are slow because we have a lot of commissions and we only work a couple hours a night. So we've been leaving our stuff behind. But I also have something I've been working on for a couple of years, and I have the script down already. And I did use the same technique. I thought about it in my head. So I'm writing a comic called Evolution.
I like it.
Okay. It's quick hitbound is basically about a group of aliens that all they do is they're almost immortal. They've been here for ages, and they observe the evolution on different planets that have life. And they're not supposed to interfere. But a group of aliens have been interfering in our lives since day one, trying to evolve this planet. And they failed several different times as they went. But that's all I'm going to say about that portion. But they have come to us with a final evolution idea. And they have revealed themselves because they pretty much have tried not to reveal themselves. And they came and they're giving us now a formula to evolve to the next level of human 2.0. better thinking, better running, better activity, last longer, and so forth, heal faster. But basically, the comic will take us through how humans would do. How would they really react if aliens would show up and say, "Hey, I've been watching you all along, and I think you need this to go to the next stage." Would they just sit there and go, "Yeah, hey, hooray, thank you, alien"? Or would they be like, "What the? What do you mean you've been watching us from before? What do you mean you've been giving us stuff before, pushing us before?
You
Why?
bunch of creepy bastards.
You mean we didn't come up with this stuff with ourselves? Now you're telling us we're stupid, and so forth." So, what happened? So the alien leaves 30 years back, and that's where it starts. They come 30 years later, and what has humanity become at that point in time? So I have a script for number one. It hasn't gone into artwork or anything yet, but writing the script, I kept myself in mind of, would it fit in those bubbles? And I kept myself splitting it up in panels. Some people like to write a script, and that's another thing I noticed. They'll write a script per page, but they don't really split it up into panels. They let that to the artist, right? So the artist will split that up, make panels, and then from there I get the script and I look at the panels and I try to have to match. Okay, this artwork looks good on that, and this looks good on that. So that's kind of like a demo. You should already know how many panels is going to take you on that page and how you're splitting up your script to have bubbles, narration, caption. All those things are different and they all occupy space. So at the moment, and as I wrote mine in my mind, I made sure mentally that if I was going to have a close-up, that there's something else on the side, a background or something that they can put we can put the lettering on, and things like that. You need to have a cinematographic idea when you're watching TV. That's very important. You watch a movie, oh man, that movie is showing you a lot. Don't just watch the movie for the content. Look at how they're taking the images on that movie. Every time they show you a close-up, where are they located? You see the back of the head of somebody who's speaking is on the left, the one on the listening is on the right, and so forth. All that kind of idea of how it changes up and down, and then you look at it, and if that's how some people learn to draw that way, but then you have to think in those frames, where am I going to fit those bubbles?
Yeah, so you're thinking almost backwards. Like you have a general idea, but as you go through it, you're like, then you have to almost reverse it and be like, okay, is this going to fit in this section? Like, am I thinking of it correctly? So you're thinking of it from a writer perspective and then a creator perspective on top of it. That must be exhausting.
I know it's difficult. It is difficult. And I don't tell anybody that's going to work on that right away. But it's an idea. You start that way because, I mean, it's sad when you receive the commission and the lettering doesn't really fit, and then you have to start shaving it off, and people start thinking, oh, but how are they going to know this is what they're trying to say, and how are they going to convey, and the artwork's being covered, and the artist is like, some people don't care. They're like, I got paid to color that, so who cares, right? Some people do care. It's like, my name is on that, and I want to make sure it looks right.
Yeah, I mean, I get you.
And it's important. And it's important to me. And I don't care what the comic is, whether if it's something silly or something I think is really cool or something that I'm like, oh my God, I don't think I would ever touch that. No. You're paying me to do something for you. So I will do it, and I'll make sure I'll do it right, because guess what? My name is attached to that.
Yeah. I mean,
it's important.
I think, and Mike, I think that is a whole different topic. That is like another topic for another night.
For sure.
Because there is definitely a generation difference in people that think like you and I do, and that you're paid $1. That dollar means something, and so does your name. and that it's an equal trade. Like, you paid me to do something perfect because of my talent, I'm going to give it to you. And then there's other people that are younger who seem to fly through it, even though they might be super talented. They might hit it once in a while, or they slack off because they don't really like the project, or they're like, yeah, they paid me, but this other one's cooler. And you start getting into all this stuff, and don't get me wrong, there are people in our generation that do the same. It's not only in a younger generation thing. However, I have seen more of it as the younger people come, and it may be just because they aren't old enough yet and have gotten screwed enough yet, where they're like, I really need to stop doing that. But when I was growing up, when I did a job, whether it was mowing a lawn, or when I got my first job, in the produce section at the supermarket or something like that, you were getting paid to do a job, and you did it the best you could because that's what it was. And I don't know if that type of thought and feeling is with the certain younger generations that they are now. However, if you look at the really, really young people, the ones that are 18, 19, 20 coming up, I think you're going to see a resurgence of that, because guys like you and I started having kids and teaching them the value of that. And we're like, you're not going to be like that little kid or that kid that just screwed me over. We're going to make sure that when you do a job, you do it the best you can, and you will blow the other people clear out of the water because people can count on you. Do you see the same type of thing? Or, do you have access to younger people within the industry?
I got to tell you, I've seen this long before. This is something, this is nothing new. Everyone, a lot of people are like, I want to do the cool stuff, and I want to do the big thing. But I had a friend, really good artist, when I was in the university back in 92, 93, around that time. And he was really good. But we'd go to Comic-Cons, and he'd sit down and draw in a corner, and then people would get attention, right? And come over to him and be like, oh, like, they go to a table, I'll give you $10 and draw a character. They see him drawing and thought he was there doing the same thing. So they pass by and be like, hey, $10 to draw Wolverine fighting, the Hulk, or $10 to draw Spawn, or $10 to draw. So he would draw the characters and get $10 out of it. He wasn't even part of the Comic-Con. So anyways, some guy showed up and be like, hey, I like your artwork. I got a comic for you. And, I want you to draw the comic for me, and I'm going to pay you X amount of dollars per page. So that was his very first commission. And the guy said, look, I like Comic-Cons, and what I'll do when the book is done is I'll buy a table, and you can come into that table, and you can present the work with me, and you can draw, and we can do things. And if you have a comic that you want, we can put it in ads in between my comic, and I can help you publish that up.
Wow.
Where do you get a chance like that?
Seriously.
So anyways, the guy started, and halfway through the comic, he was getting lazy and not wanting to draw. And I'd ask him, like, what's going on? He goes, I don't really like this character. I think it's really dumb. I was like, dude, but this is a great opportunity. You start here, then other people pick you up.
Mm-hmm. Did he finish?
Right? You got to start somewhere. Well, no.
Oh.
Never did. Eventually, he gave up the comic and told the guy he couldn't finish it or whatever, and guy had to get somebody else.
Oh no.
And that to me is sad. But the stories like that, they always come around, and it's an unfortunate situation.
Mm-hmm.
It's like everything else. If you need a job, if you start looking for that amazing job, sorry, but you're going to be out of job for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone's looking to wash toilets on the next side, well, and you need money, well, you go, you wash toilets, and you watch for that other job to be available.
Mm-hmm.
Climb up the ladder, and you make it. But, this has always been a thing. And it's weird, because you always have those people like... But yes, sorry, I don't want to take the time up with that.
No, I mean, that's kind of where I was going. I just didn't know if it was something that was... Because I am relatively new to the comic industry. I mean, I've only been in it for like 7 years, 6-7 years, and I've seen a lot of younger people at shows and stuff like that have attitudes that I didn't think were that they should. Yet then I see older gentlemen that have been in it for 20 years, and they sometimes have the same attitude. Like, well, you're not Marvel or DC, so I'm not going to take it. I'm like, dude, you're here drawing like with your head down. And I definitely see it more with younger people and occasionally older people, but I do see the same thing like you said. And they're like, no, you're not Marvel or DC. And I'm like, but I have money like in my hand. And they're like, no, not good enough. Or it doesn't interest me enough. And I will say that before taking a job, I think it's perfectly fine whether or not you think that you're going to like that genre, that character, that story type. I 100% agree. That's why you should at least, I tell all the artists that I'm going to work with, if you like it, you can have the job. If you don't, tell me you don't so I can find somebody that does, because that does show in the work for sure. But don't half-ass it once you get in there.
That's the thing. Yeah, if you're not going to work on it, then this might as well not follow that advice either,
yes.
Right? If you're going to crap it out, so you have to work on it like it was your stuff all the time.
Yep.
It's your work. It's your work. It's your work. Someone's not paying you to do it for them. No, you're doing it for yourself. And because your name's attached to it, that's extremely important. The other thing too is, for example, when new people, and I'll go back to them. I won't do it. It's not my job. So in coloring, they'll hand me the line art. Boy, if that line art, that scan is horrible and that line is not black, and when I zoom it in, there's all this, it looks like a really bad photocopy with all these little specks and whatnot. It's all broken up, and look, no, I go right back. I was like, look, I'm sorry, this line art is it's not scanned properly. You need to scan it again, or clean up your artwork, all the pencils and whatnot that you left behind. Clean it up properly and scan it at a better, a higher resolution, and use black and white so you don't get all these blue lines. And no, it's important, because when you hand in stuff like that to a colorist, man, it makes the work a lot longer.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, that's what it's there for. I mean, obviously, and I think that's a whole nother thing. What I'd like to do is eventually have a panel with some people that are industry vets, like that have 20, 30 years experience. Like, I'd bring David Campiti in for sure, because he's been doing this for 20 some odd years. Cliff Richards is another guy that I know who's been doing it for 20 years. He used to draw Batman and a whole bunch of the DC characters, some of the Marvel.
Awesome.
And then have some of the younger guys, and not so much as a bitch session, because that's definitely not what I meant by bringing up as they went younger that there were problems. But what do they see as problems with people in their area and, in their age bracket? And I think that'd be a fantastic discussion of like a roundtable between 5 and 6 people. That's just like, hey, what do you see? If people are getting into this, or if you were going to tell your demographic, your age group, what to do, like, here's what I see our crew doing, and be critical. I think that'd be an awesome video to do, of just like, yo, get your head out of your ass. Like, here's what you're doing, and I don't like it. And you're making us look bad, us older guys that are trying to make it happen. So I think that's a whole nother kit and caboodle.
Of course. And there's other things that are not like that. The art, as you can see, it's been changing since the late 70s. So if you look at the art back then and the art now, all that artwork was very tight, closed. Okay, and you get now to your artwork now is so fancy. It's a lot of open lines.
Yep,
and that is rough for a colorist too. It takes time, because a colorist just wants to speed up, right? So they just want to use, for example, the magic wand and select that section and color in that section. But if the line is open, it goes everywhere. Selects everything. So you got to go, and it takes time. The flatting takes a really long time because all the lines are open. So we're changing, we're evolving. Comics are evolving, and they're evolving too because the indie community is also making, the artwork looks amazing, but again, it's becoming more difficult to be able to relate to that artwork.
Yep.
It's beautiful. Don't get me wrong. It's super beautiful, but it takes longer for you to be able to put a comic book out because of all that fancy work.
Yeah, and I will say that the younger guys do have that over a lot of the older guys, that the younger guys, while they usually do stuff a little bit quicker from what I've seen, their style is amazing. Like, you're getting all these new styles and not genres, that's the wrong word, but stylistic view of art that was not there even 10 years ago. So you get all these new guys that are in their 20s that are cranking through work like you've never seen. And I had never thought about it from a colorist perspective. I only seen it from inks and pencils, that these guys, and then they're on Twitch and they're on YouTube and they're showing people what they're doing. And it blows me away how good their content can be when they put their mind to it. And that's some of the older guys are just like, I can't even copy that. Like, that style is so beyond what I know how to do that it leaves me in the dust. It's a completely different style. And so, I mean, there's pluses and minuses to the older guys, new guys, back and forth, but it's
amazing. Some beautiful, amazing artwork. The problem is trying to color that artwork.
Yes. And I can only imagine. I had never thought about it from that aspect.
I personally, I've mentioned before to other people, the more details you put on there, the more details I'm going to color, because I have this thing. I love details. And so everything I see needs to be colored. For example, if you have something that's exploding, but it's not just an explosion, there's shards of glass everywhere and little pieces of things flying around, I'm going to color everything. It's not just put a flat on it. I'm going to put a shadow and a highlight. And if it's glass, some of it's going to have sparkles on it. Because in my mind, when that glass is exploding, those shards, some of them have sparkles.
Yeah, some of them are light reflecting and
exactly.
Stuff like
some are the way they're twisting. So I will go through all of it, and I'll put special effects on it. I'll put sparkles on it, and I'll shade it. I'll color it, but it takes time because tiny little things that you need to pick and choose and take out. And of course, going back to open lines, and it just takes a long time. And a lot of these new people with beautiful art don't take in consideration going back into the lettering world. They put this amazing amount of work, an amazing amount of detail in that panel, and you can't fit a bubble in there.
Damn. Well, listen, Mike, we have been talking for almost an hour.
That's awesome.
So is there anything you want to shout out before we take off, and I can, let you actually get to sleep before we both go to work tomorrow? We don't go to work together, just so everybody knows that, that's listening. It's not like we work together or anything, but I also work. And there's a big old cat behind you.
Yes, this is my cat fan.
I didn't know if it was going to try to eat your head or something. Is there anything you want to shout out before we go? I'm going to have your links. Both of the links to the comics we have on Spinwhiz Comics are already going to be in there. The link to your company is going to be in there. In case you want to hire Mike, the link is below, or you want to check out his work, make sure you do. The link is in there. Anything else you want to chat about before we take off?
Oh, no. People just come on, check out Lumi Art Studios. You can take a look at my coloring. You can take a look at my lettering. You can see Luby San's work, pencils, inks. You can hire us separately. If you want to buy comics, at least from our end, we only have one right now. We're working on more, but we're more of creators, right? Coloring and lettering and whatnot. And then, of course, Crazy Monkey Ink. I've partnered with them, and I'm doing a lot of work for them. So check out Crazy Monkey Ink. I have my hands on a lot of their comics.
Nice.
If it's not lettering, it's coloring, one of the two. But on a lot of them, I've done a lot of work.
Well, I'll bother Gabe and see if I can get some print copies of them so I can show them on when we do our next intro or our next interview, and I can show them live as we're going through.
That sounds great.
So I'll bother him. I like bothering Gabe anyway. It's fun. Well, listen, man, thank you so much for being here. I know it's late. I appreciate the last minute call and you coming. You are welcome on the show anytime. Call me, especially when you have a new project coming up. Call me up. Let me know. We'll get you on the show. You are the man, and thank you for giving us such a different view of the comic industry that we have not had on the show yet. Absolutely amazing, and I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. Have a great night. Everybody,
same to you.
Everybody hang out just 1 minute. I'm going to say goodbye to Mike, and I'll be right back.